Hello, guys. Welcome to my channel. I'm Sagar, and today we'll be talking about one of my personal favorites out of my bookshelf, and that's Tao of Physics. Now, this book, in my opinion, is perhaps unique in a way because it was written at a time when Eastern philosophies was still unknown to the world, and the author did a magnificent job in bringing those lesser known concepts being made aware to the world and wrote a book. And this book was published back in like 1975. And today we're going to take a deeper look into this. Now, the Tao of Physics was written by a gentleman called Fritjof Capra. Now, he has a PhD in theoretical physics, and he got that probably in the early 60s and whatnot. Because this year he also wrote a collection of essays where he kind of dives deep into his early days when he was getting started in physics and how he was stuck on like concepts of modern physics and how he kind of explored into Eastern mysticism and how he drew inspiration, and that kind of helped him to uh, make progress in his domain of work. Because out of many interests in physics, he is first and foremost a system theorist, and all of his further books revolve around all of those theories, also known as system theories. You would also learn about system theory probably just on a surface level in this book as well. The structure of this book is divided into three sections. The first section is called The Way of Physics, and this is where the writer talks about all about modern physics and what are some of the roadblocks. The second section is called The Way of Eastern Mysticism, and this section is where he kinds of dives deep into Hinduism, Buddhism, Chinese philosophies, Taoism, Zen philosophies, and all of those majority uh, religious beliefs in Asia. And the third section is the most important section where he aptly names it the parallels. And that's how he draws similarities between two of those fields. Something to keep in mind is the very basis or the very foundation of Western science is an empirical approach. An empirical approach can be summarized into a process which contains steps like experimentation, observation, and keeping probably log entries, and using your analysis or your logical thinking, you derive certain conclusion, and then you propose your theory in front of the scientific community. Eastern mysticism takes a radically different approach from the traditional empirical approach of Western science. And the way how it does it is it represents all of these grand scientific ideas and concepts in terms of symbolism. Now, people who are Hindus, they know that I'm a Hindu myself. We have these deities or idols or gods we worship. The very famous out of all of our gods is the Holy Trinity. That's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Now, taking apart the religious angle out of it and analyzing that from a scientific angle, Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu can also be symbolized into three important concepts in Western science. And that being Vishnu represents space, Shiva represents time, and Brahma is an extrapolation of space time, which we perceive as the material world. And similar philosophies can also be found in Taoism and some ancient Chinese philosophies as well, where they used to believe in representing all of these advanced concepts in forms of poetry and thought exercises instead of using mathematical language. Uh, Almost everyone in this world right now, whoever belongs to a scientific background, has a Western education, and Western science relies on mathematical models, formulas, and all of these logical relations and whatnot. and those kind of rely on numbers and other methodologies, but that does not necessarily holds true in Eastern mysticism. Let's talk about what's the academic relevance of this book. So, if you are a physicist or someone from a scientific background or someone in general who loves talking about science, is it worth your time reading this book? Well, the answer is yes, because the amount of research which the author had put in, and that back in the 70s when globalization had still not occurred in a mainframe, uh, in a main scale point of time. Um, the amount of details, the amount of similarities that has been drawn in all of these chapters makes you think. And especially if you are a physicist and if you are someone struggling with string theory and probably like dark matter or higher dimensions. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a physicist. I'm someone who loves science. I consider myself physics buff, but my relevance of physics and knowledge comes from like reading research papers and books like yeah, like popular books like Richard Feynman's Introduction to Physics or probably Cosmos by Carl Sagan and all of those things. And so it is much more relevant for someone who is full-time invested into researching into physics and you are kind of experiencing roadblocks. Oftentimes, a change of perspective helps you in identifying new methods for essentially what you are trying to discover. So, this book out here will definitely give you a new way or a new angle to look at similar stuff. Well, probably one thing which is really important before you start reading this book is to have an open mind. Now, I know the popular media out there has a different representation of Eastern religions and Eastern mysticism, oftentimes quoted as mumbo jumbo. But what I request you to have an open mind before reading this book and be open to possibilities in general, and then start reading some of the chapters where um, the author draws parallels. Now, if you are in a hurry, you can definitely skip the first two sections of the book, probably like if you are not someone who enjoys theology, because section two is all about theology and how individual religion plays a role in the Eastern world. So you can directly jump into the parallel section. And one of my favorite chapters in this parallel section is the cosmic dance. So I'm going to read a few of my favorite lines from this chapter. Now, as you can see, this is a very heavily annotated or noted version. I do, most of the times, I do critical reading sessions where I kind of mark all of my favorite chapters and lines and I take notes as well. So I'm gonna take some time to read a few of the lines which stood out to me when I was doing my personal research into physics and Eastern mysticism. So at the very beginning of chapter 15, The Cosmic Dance, there's a line that says, "The whole universe is thus engaged in endless motion and activity." Now, if you're a physicist, I do not definitely need to tell you about how the world comprises of subatomic particles. But someone who is not a physicist or someone who is just getting started in science, I can just say as a summary, the entire world definitely comprises of subatomic particles. And in order to understand subatomic phenomena, you have to take a different approach from classical mechanics, which is also known as Newtonian physics, where it talks about large bodies and how motions affect each other, and take a look into another phenomenon called quantum physics, which explains how the subatomic particles are nothing but like energy packets which are constantly into motion or activity. Like, even though the popular saying says, consider a body is at rest, right? Even if you have studied some form of high school physics and you are trying to solve a problem, a classic problem begins with a statement: consider a body at rest. When it comes to subatomic phenomenon, there is nothing such as like body at rest, because at any given moment of time, any particle is always full of energy and is always performing all of those vibrations, if you may say. Now, this chapter is full of like diagrams and whatnot. So, if at all you are someone who is trying to uh, take a grasp of like complicated physics concepts, this book can also serve as a good introduction to such concepts. Well, um, I mean, if you are looking to become a guru on quantum physics, is this book for you? No. But if you want to just get started on enough concepts to learn about what is the difference between classical physics and quantum physics, this book is definitely for you. Um, Now, further along this chapter, the author does an excellent job in representing Shiva, which I talked about earlier, and the statement goes like this. According to Hindu belief, all life is part of a great rhythmic process of creation and destruction, of death and rebirth, and Shiva's dance symbolizes this eternal life death rhythm which goes on in endless cycles. It's such a beautiful representation of Eastern mysticism. People who are familiar with Hindu scriptures, they're oftentimes written in Sanskrit, and they have and all of the scriptures are in form of poems. But if you decode along the lines, or as the popular saying goes, read between the lines, you would realize how uh, the very essence of all of those scriptures is trying to say the same thing as quantum physics is trying to prove through mathematical formulas and whatnot. Now, there's also another chapter where the author does an excellent job in drawing similarities between Chinese philosophies and Western science. Now, uh, this goes in chapter 3, Beyond Language. Now, it's not an exact comparison between a mathematical or physical phenomenon with Chinese philosophy, but it's the way how a scientist and a popular philosopher draw their similarities by describing their field of study. So let's first read what Suzuki, who was a Japanese American novelist, and used to study more like Zenism and Buddhism or Taoism. And the way how he describes Eastern mysticism goes like this. The contradiction so puzzling to the ordinary way of thinking comes from the fact that we have to use language to communicate our inner experience, which in its very nature transcends linguistics. Means the experience of spiritualism or philosophy out there sometimes cannot be expressed in any language that is known to humankind, whether it's English or Mandarin or Hindi, doesn't matter. Sometimes the experience is so beautiful and so mind boggling, you cannot even put it to words. And on a similar note, Heisenberg, the gentleman who gave us Heisenberg uncertainty principle, he has also something to say similar about Western science. The problems of language here are really serious. We wish to speak in some way about the structure of atoms, but we cannot speak about atoms in ordinary language. And he was kind of alluding to the intricacies involved in quantum realm because keep in mind that Heisenberg was around like in the early 1900s, right around the cusp of revolution in scientific community where people were reluctant to shed off the classical understanding of the universe using Newtonian physics and were like early on adopting new theories like quantum phenomenon, all those things. So it was really hard for the physicists back then to describe the subatomic particles motion and the operations involved in that realm into English or mathematical or any other language known to humankind. So this is actually one of my favorite chapters as well because it the name and these two quotes from these two brilliant gentlemen kind of gives you an introduction of what the chapter is going to be and how it is going to look like. Something to also talk about is earlier I mentioned about the similarities between Shiva and the cosmic dance, or the continued destruction and uh, formation of energy patterns. Is that uh, the author, Mr. Capra, also proposed this to CERN laboratory, the one which is present in Switzerland, uh, the very place which has large hadron collider experiment built underground in the laboratory base. Now, when he proposed this particular similarity, it was accepted by the scientific community. And in 2004, Indian government presented a statue of Nataraja. Nataraja is actually a very specific rendition of Lord Shiva from Hinduism. Uh, in a way, like he is frozen into this dance movement. Now, Indian government presented a statue of Nataraja to CERN laboratories, and they installed that statue right in front of the entrance gateway because they publicly acknowledge that Shiva is probably the only symbolic representation of the continued destruction and formation of the subatomic realm in this universe. And that perhaps was the biggest achievement of Mr. Capra. So, if there's any fact that should convince you that you should be reading this book, is that fact that it has been public. The similarities between Eastern philosophies and Western science has already been publicly acknowledged by one of the leading scientific institutes in the world. And yeah, worth your time. Now, I would like to talk about how big a role this book played in my personal research journey. Now, I read this book back in 2019 for the first time, and to be honest, it was a bit too much for me. At that time as well, I did not have much experience or much knowledge on Hindu scriptures and whatnot. And I reread this book last year. And in this duration of 4 years, I kind of actually broadened my horizons, meaning I started indulging more into like scriptures from other cultures, literature from other cultures. I kind of started appreciating the symbolism or the story which other cultures are trying to the other cultures are trying to say through their uh, books or scriptures. And so when I reread this, I was literally mind blown because it was natural. I had forgotten most of the book's content within 4 years, but rereading this was definitely a fresh take on the classical concepts. Um, it also kind of opened my horizon into other areas of scientific domain. Uh, so, if you are familiar with other works from Mr. Capra, he talks mostly about systems theory as well as a holistic approach in solving bigger problems out there. Now, when it comes to solving problems in mathematics or physics or science in general, the popular way is known as the reductionist approach, meaning you kind of isolate the, the entire problem into smaller chunks. And then you try solving the smaller chunks, and then you fit on solution uh, one and solution two, and so forth. And you expect a grand solution to be built. But oftentimes, that is not applicable for a lot of areas of studies out there, medical science or economics, for example, where trying to solve all of these problems in an isolated way makes the solver, that is us, to ignore the bigger picture uh, in the horizon. So, on the opposite side of the spectrum to the reductionist approach is the holistic approach or the systems theory approach, where you kind of start thinking in bigger pictures. You take the problem into a whole or as in its entirety, and you formulate your hypothesis and theories in a way that takes into consideration of the bigger picture as a whole rather than breaking up into isolated parts. So this book definitely highlighted a lot of ongoing roadblocks or problems with modern physics and its approach, and someone who is trying to probably propose a new hypothesis or a new theory in scientific community, um, and they need a different take on the classical concepts. This book provided a way how to go out there and explore and study different kind of materials and draw inspiration from those and then come back and improve. So that being said, I would read this book personally 5 out of 5. Maybe I'm a little bit biased. I just want to put it out there. But personally, I did not find any shortcomings. I've already mentioned this before, but I will say it again. Full disclosure, I'm not a physicist. I'm just a person who loves physics and loves learning scientific concepts. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next time.